I hid an Apache mom and her child. Now she wants me to father the next one and stay forever. The sun was just beginning to set over the small, dusty town in Arizona, casting a warm, golden glow across the barren landscape. In this quiet, rural town, far from the bustle of city life, he lived alone in a modest, one-story house on the edge of town. His name was Jack. He wasn't used to much excitement in his life. By day, he worked as a mechanic in the local garage, fixing cars and trucks that passed through. And by night, he spent his time reading or working on old engines in his spare time. It was a simple life, one that didn't ask much of him. Jack had been living this way for as long as he could remember. It was easier for him to keep to himself, to avoid complicated relationships or commitments. The quiet, peaceful routine of his life was all he needed. His house was simple, a little too quiet at times, but it was comfortable. There were no loud parties, no drama, just the sound of the wind rustling through the desert and the occasional hum of a car engine. But everything changed the day he heard a knock at his door. It was a soft knock, almost hesitant. At first, Jack thought it might be one of his neighbors, someone asking for help with a broken-down car, or maybe just a casual hello. But when he opened the door, he wasn't prepared for what he saw. Standing there on his doorstep was a woman and a young child. They both looked out of place in the harsh desert landscape, and something about the way they stood, tired and uncertain, told Jack that they weren't just passing through. The woman, who was around his age, looked worn out, her clothes torn and dirty from what seemed like days of travel. The child, a small boy no older than 6 or 7, clung to her side. His eyes were wide with fear, and his small hand held tightly to the woman's. They both looked like they had been running, escaping something or someone. The woman, after a long pause, looked up at Jack. Her face was both fearful and relieved, as if she had been searching for something and had finally found it. "Can you help us?" she asked, her voice soft, almost breaking. Jack didn't know what to say. His first instinct was to close the door and pretend he hadn't heard. After all, he didn't know these people, and he wasn't the kind of man who got involved in other people's troubles. But there was something in her eyes, a quiet desperation, that stopped him. He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do, but his heart seemed to lead him. "Who are you?" Jack asked, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm Naomi, and this is my son Eli," she replied. Her voice was steady now, but Jack could see the faint trembling in her hands as she spoke. We need somewhere to stay, just for a little while. Please, we're not asking for much." Jack looked at her for a moment, trying to read her, trying to figure out if there was something more to the story. But the child, Eli, stared at him with wide, trusting eyes, and Jack's heart softened. He could feel the weight of the moment, and the fear in their faces seemed to mirror something deep inside him. He wasn't sure why, but something about them felt familiar. "Are you running from someone?" Jack asked, his voice quieter now. Naomi hesitated before answering, glancing over her shoulder as though to make sure no one was following them. "Yes," she said, almost in a whisper. We're trying to escape from a bad situation, a very bad situation, and we don't have anywhere else to go." Jack's mind raced. He wasn't sure what he was hearing. Why had they come to him? He was just a man who worked on cars and lived a quiet life. He wasn't equipped to handle whatever it was they were running from. But there was something in the way she spoke, an earnestness that made him pause. Without thinking, he stepped aside and motioned for them to come in. "All right," he said, his voice almost reluctant. "You can stay for the night. But we'll have to talk more about this in the morning." Naomi nodded gratefully, and without another word, she stepped into his home, with Eli following closely behind. Jack closed the door, locking it with a soft click, and stood for a moment in the silence of his living room, still trying to process what had just happened. As they entered, Naomi immediately sank onto the couch, pulling Eli onto her lap. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world had finally caught up with her. Jack stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure of what to do next. He wasn't used to guests, especially ones who were so clearly in need. "Thank you," Naomi said, her voice small but sincere. "You have no idea what this means to us." Jack nodded but didn't speak right away. He moved to the kitchen to make some coffee, something to break the silence. As he worked, he couldn't help but glance back at them. Eli was sitting quietly now, his eyes heavy with sleep. Jack's heart tugged at the sight of the little boy. He looked so young, so innocent, caught up in something he didn't understand. After a few moments, Jack returned to the living room with 2 cups of coffee, one for himself and one for Nayeli. He handed her the cup, and their fingers brushed as she took it. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude but also a quiet sadness. "Can you tell me what's going on?" Jack asked softly as he took a seat in the armchair opposite her. "Why are you running?" Nayeli took a deep breath, staring into her coffee cup for a long time before speaking. "I'm from a small Apache community near the border," she began. "My family and I have always lived there, but things got worse. A man I was with, he wasn't a good person. He's dangerous and he's been threatening us. I couldn't stay there anymore. I had to leave." Jack listened carefully, his eyes fixed on her as she spoke. He could hear the pain in her voice, the weight of the choices she had made to protect her son. But there was something more behind her words. Jack could tell she wasn't just running from a man, she was running from a whole world that didn't accept her, a world that had already taken too much from her. "I didn't know where else to go," Nayeli continued. "But when we were traveling, I heard rumors about this town, about you. I knew I had to come here. I don't know why, but I felt like this was the place where we could be safe." Jack stared at her, feeling a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He didn't know what she meant by this town, or why she had come to him specifically. But he also knew that, for reasons he couldn't fully understand, he was in this now. There was no turning back. "You're safe here," Jack said quietly, though even as he said it, he wasn't sure if it was true. He didn't know what kind of trouble they were in or how long they could stay hidden. But for tonight, at least, they were here, and that's all he could offer. The night stretched on, filled with quiet conversation as Jack tried to understand more of Nayeli's situation. They spoke in hushed tones, as if the walls of his home were thin and the shadows outside were watching them. Yet in the midst of the uncertainty, Jack felt a strange comfort. There was something about Nayeli and Eli, a connection perhaps that Jack hadn't anticipated. The evening wore on, and eventually Jack made up the couch for them, placing pillows and blankets around. Nayeli thanked him again, and Eli, now asleep in his mother's arms, rested soundly for the first time in what seemed like days. Jack watched them from the doorway of the living room, his heart heavy with the weight of their presence. He didn't know what the future held or what role he would play in their lives. But one thing was certain. For now, they were his responsibility. As he lay down in his own bed, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change everything. It wasn't just about the strangers who had come to his door. It was about something deeper, something he had never expected, and he couldn't help but wonder if his life would ever return to the way it had been before they arrived. The next morning, Jack woke to the soft sound of birds singing outside his window, the sun casting gentle rays across his room. For a moment, he lay still, trying to piece together the events of the previous night. The woman and child who had come to his doorstep, desperate for help, were now in his home, safe for the time being. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. He had always lived a quiet, solitary life, but somehow that had all shifted in a matter of hours. He got up and stretched, glancing at the clock. It was early, still too early for most of the town to be awake. Jack made his way downstairs, expecting to find the house still, but to his surprise, Nayeli was already up. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked tired, but there was a calmness in her expression that Jack hadn't noticed before. She looked at him as he entered the room, and for a moment their eyes met, both of them uncertain but somehow knowing that this shared silence was the beginning of something important. "Good morning," Jack said, breaking the silence. He could tell from her eyes that she had been awake for some time, probably thinking about everything they had discussed the night before. She nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning," she replied softly. "Thank you for letting us stay." Jack poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. He didn't know what to say. He had never been good with people, especially strangers. He wasn't used to having someone else in his space, let alone someone who was running from something dangerous. His heart went out to Nayeli, but he wasn't sure how to help her. What could he do? He was just a mechanic in a small town. He didn't have the answers she needed. But there was something about her, something that made him want to protect her, to keep her safe. "So," Jack began, trying to fill the silence, "how long have you been running like this?" Nayeli glanced down at her coffee, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of the cup. She didn't answer right away, as though the question weighed heavily on her. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but tinged with sadness. "It's been a while," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "We've been moving from place to place, trying to stay ahead of things. My family and I were always on the move, but it got harder when Eli was born. I couldn't keep living that way, constantly looking over my shoulder. I had to leave. I didn't want him growing up like that." Jack nodded, understanding more than she knew. His own childhood had been filled with quiet, predictable routines. The thought of living in constant fear, never knowing what the next day would bring, was something he could hardly fathom. But there was something in Nayeli's voice, the way she spoke about her son, that made him understand her choices. She wasn't just running for herself, she was running to give her child a chance at a better life. "I understand," Jack said, his voice soft. "It's not easy living like that, but you're safe here, for now at least." She smiled faintly, though the worry in her eyes remained. "I appreciate it more than you know, Jack. I don't know what I would have done without you." Jack felt the weight of her gratitude, and for a moment he wasn't sure how to handle it. He wasn't a hero, just a man who decided to help. But as he looked at Nayeli, he realized that his life had changed in a way he couldn't explain. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but he knew he couldn't just turn his back on them now. Over the next few days, life in Jack's small house settled into a new rhythm. Jack continued with his work at the garage during the day, while Nayeli and Eli stayed inside, trying to stay hidden from the world outside. Eli had quickly adjusted to the quiet surroundings of Jack's home. He spent most of his time playing with old toys that Jack had stashed away in the attic, and he often followed Jack around the house, curious about everything. Jack found himself looking after him, teaching him simple things like how to fix things around the house, or showing him how to play with toy cars. It was strange to him, being around a child so much, but there was something about Eli's innocent joy that filled the house with a warmth Jack hadn't felt in a long time. Nayeli kept to herself, spending hours by the window, her eyes scanning the horizon as if waiting for someone or something to appear. Jack could tell she was still anxious, still haunted by the fear of being found. She would occasionally ask him questions about the area, about the town, but she never spoke much about her past. Jack didn't press her, knowing that whatever she had fled from was likely something too painful to discuss just yet. Despite the tension that hung in the air, there were moments of peace. In the evenings, Jack would cook dinner for all of them and they would sit together at the table. It was simple food, nothing fancy, just a hot meal. But it was a shared meal, and that meant something. The quiet conversations over dinner grew more comfortable with each passing night. Jack began to learn little things about Nayeli, like how she loved the taste of fresh fruit, or how she missed the smell of rain on the desert floor. She told him about her life back home, how her family had lived in a tight-knit community, and how she had always felt connected to her heritage. But she also told him about the heartbreak she had endured, the people who had hurt her and made her feel like she didn't belong. It was clear that she had been through a lot, but there was a strength in her that Jack admired. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the stars twinkle in the clear desert sky, Nayeli spoke again, this time more hesitantly than before. "Jack," she began, her voice quiet, "I don't know what the future holds for us. I don't know how long we can stay here, how long we can keep running. But I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything you've done for us. I don't take it for granted." Jack looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "You don't have to thank me," he said, his voice soft. "You don't owe me anything, I just want to help." She nodded, her gaze drifting back to the stars. There was a long pause before she spoke again, her words weighing heavy in the still night air. "I can't keep running forever, Jack," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't keep Eli in hiding. I want more for him, more than just surviving. But I don't know how to move forward from here." Jack could feel the weight of her words, the uncertainty that hung in the air. He didn't have the answers, didn't know how to solve her problems. But one thing was clear, he wasn't going to let her face it alone. He had made a choice to open his door to them, and now that choice was leading him down a path he never expected. "You don't have to figure everything out right now," Jack said, his voice calm. "Take things one step at a time. We'll figure it out together." Nayeli looked at him, her eyes full of unspoken emotion. She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and gratitude in her expression. "Thank you," she said softly, and for the first time since they had arrived, Jack felt a sense of peace. There were still so many unknowns, so many questions left unanswered. But in this moment, with Nayeli and Eli by his side, Jack realized that he wasn't alone anymore. and for the first time in a long time that didn't feel so scary. Days turned into weeks, and Jack's quiet home became more of a sanctuary for Nayeli and Eli. The three of them settled into a comfortable routine. Jack still worked during the day, but his evenings had become something different. Instead of solitude, his nights were now filled with soft laughter, the hum of conversation, and the occasional sound of Eli's playful giggles. The house, once silent and empty, now had a warmth to it that Jack hadn't realized he was missing. But as the days passed, Jack could sense that something had shifted in Nayeli. She was no longer as tense, no longer constantly scanning the horizon as she had been when they first arrived. There was a quiet peace in her, but also a kind of sadness, as though she was waiting for something, or perhaps someone. Jack could see it in the way she sometimes paused in the middle of a conversation, as if her thoughts were miles away. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a brilliant shade of pink and orange, Jack found Nayeli sitting on the porch. She was staring out at the desert, her hands clasped together in her lap. Eli was inside, playing with his toys, but the silence between Jack and Nayeli felt heavy. Jack hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach her. He had gotten used to her presence in his home, to the way she could light up a room with her smile, but this quietness, this stillness in her made him uneasy. "Everything okay?" Jack asked, sitting down beside her on the porch. Nayeli didn't answer right away. She just looked out over the horizon, her eyes distant, as though she were searching for something she couldn't quite find. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, "about what happens next. About what I'm supposed to do now." Jack nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He knew she had been through so much, running from her past, hiding in a stranger's home. But he also knew that Nayeli was a strong woman, someone who wouldn't just sit idly by. She would find a way to move forward, even if it was hard. "You don't have to decide everything right now," Jack said gently, his voice calm. "Take it one day at a time. You've got time to figure things out." Nayeli turned to him then, her gaze meeting his for the first time in a while. There was something in her eyes, something that Jack couldn't quite place, but it felt like a shift, a change. "I don't want to just survive anymore," she said quietly. "I want to live. I want Eli to have a life, a good one. I don't want him growing up always looking over his shoulder." Jack felt the weight of her words. He knew that Nayeli wasn't just talking about her own life. She was talking about her son, about giving him the life she had never had, the life she had always dreamed of for him. She wanted more than just safety. She wanted peace. She wanted hope for the future. "I understand," Jack said softly, his voice full of empathy. "But it's not easy. You can't just make those things happen overnight." Nayeli sighed, a small, weary sound that seemed to come from deep within her. "I know," she said, "but I have to try. I can't keep running forever. I've been running for so long, Jack, and I don't know what else to do." Jack looked at her, and for the first time he really saw the burden she carried. The exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of the choices she had made. But there was also something else in her, something fierce, something unbreakable. "You don't have to do this alone," Jack said, his words steady and firm. "I'm here, I'll help you, we'll figure it out together." Nayeli looked at him for a long time, as if weighing his words. Then slowly she nodded, a small but sincere smile appearing on her face. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what I would do without you." Jack felt a pang in his chest, something he hadn't expected. It wasn't just the gratitude in her voice, it was something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge before. He realized in that moment that he had grown fond of her. More than fond, actually, he cared for her. He wanted to protect her, to make sure she and Eli had the chance to build the life they deserved. The days that followed were filled with quiet conversations, long walks through the desert, and moments of reflection. Jack and Nayeli didn't speak of their pasts often, but they found comfort in each other's company. They didn't have all the answers, but they had something more important: trust. It was the beginning of something that neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. One afternoon, after a particularly long day, Jack found Nayeli sitting on the porch again, her face tilted towards the sun. Eli was napping inside, and for a moment, Jack watched her from the doorway, unsure of how to break the silence. Finally, he stepped outside and sat down beside her. "I've been thinking," Jack said, his voice slow, as if testing the waters, "about what you said, about wanting to live, not just survive, and I think you're right." Nayeli turned to look at him, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. I think maybe I've been surviving too, Jack continued, his voice soft but sincere. Just going through the motions, not really living, but being here with you and Eli. It's made me realize there's more to life than just getting by. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding. Naomi reached over and placed her hand gently on his arm, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. Jack turned to her, and in that moment he realized how much he had come to care for her, not just as someone in need, but as someone he could see a future with. I don't have all the answers, Jack said, his voice quiet. But I want to help you. I want to make sure that Eli grows up in a world where he doesn't have to hide anymore. Naomi smiled, and it was the first time in a long while that Jack saw her smile fully, without the weight of worry or fear behind it. It was a smile of hope, of possibility. I never thought I'd find someone like you, she said softly. Someone who would help us. I never thought I'd find a place where we could be safe, and maybe even start over. Jack smiled back, though his heart felt heavy with the weight of what he was offering. He knew that nothing was certain, nothing was guaranteed. But for the first time, he felt like they had a chance, a real chance. Together, they could build a life. They could start fresh. Over the next few days, they began to talk more seriously about the future. They discussed what it would take to move forward, to start building a life in this small town. Naomi talked about the life she had left behind, the family she had once known, and the dreams she had for her son. Jack listened, offering his support in whatever way he could. They didn't have a plan yet, but they were talking, they were dreaming, and that was enough for now. That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned dark, Jack and Naomi sat on the porch together. Eli was playing in the yard, his laughter filling the air. It was peaceful, almost idyllic, and for a brief moment, Jack allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could have a future. Together. The days seemed to stretch on, and with each passing one, Jack found himself growing more and more attached to Naomi and Eli. It was a strange feeling, one that he hadn't anticipated when they first arrived at his doorstep, desperate and running from a past they could never escape. But now, as the weeks went by, the bond between them had become undeniable. Jack no longer saw them as strangers. They had become part of his life, part of his world. He was no longer living the quiet, solitary existence he once had. They had changed him, and somehow he had changed them too. But despite the comfort that had settled in Jack's home, there was still a quiet tension in the air. It was the unspoken fear of the unknown, the constant worry that their pasts could catch up with them at any moment. Naomi had started to open up more, but there were still pieces of her story she had yet to share. She had never directly mentioned who or what she was running from, but Jack could feel the weight of it in everything she did. There were days when she seemed distant, when the shadows of her past seemed to creep into the quiet moments they shared. And every now and then, Jack would catch her looking out the window, her eyes scanning the horizon, as though she was waiting for something or someone to appear. One evening, after a long day of work at the garage, Jack returned home to find Naomi sitting outside on the porch, her legs drawn up to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. The sun had set, and the desert was bathed in a soft, purple light. The world felt still, almost like it was holding its breath. Jack stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. There was something about her, something in the way she carried herself, that told him she was struggling with something she hadn't shared yet. He stepped outside quietly, not wanting to startle her. He sat down beside her without saying a word, letting the silence hang between them for a moment. They didn't need words at first. There was something comforting about just sitting there side by side as the night wrapped around them like a blanket. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Naomi spoke, her voice low and uncertain. "Jack," she said, her words hesitant, "I need to tell you something." "Something important?" Jack turned to her, his heart skipping a beat. There was a seriousness in her tone that made him realize this was no small confession. He knew that whatever it was, it would change things. He was ready to listen, even if it meant facing something difficult. "I don't want to keep running anymore," Naomi continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't keep looking over my shoulder every day, afraid of what might happen, but I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to move forward." Jack felt a tightness in his chest. He didn't have all the answers, but he could hear the pain in her voice. He could feel the weight of the fear she had been carrying for so long. She had been living in constant uncertainty, never knowing when her past would catch up with her. "You don't have to keep running," Jack said softly, his voice steady and comforting. You found a place here, you found safety, and you don't have to face this alone. Naomi looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of doubt and hope. But what if they find us, Jack? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What if it's never really over? Jack didn't have an easy answer to that. He knew that their pasts weren't something they could just leave behind. But he also knew that they couldn't live in fear forever. They couldn't keep running from something that might never catch up. At some point, they would have to make a stand, face the challenges head-on, and choose to live. Listen to me, Naomi, Jack said, his voice firm. You've got Eli, you've got a future now, and that future starts right here. You don't have to keep hiding. I'm here for you, for both of you. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're safe. Tears welled up in Naomi's eyes, and she blinked quickly, trying to hold them back. I don't want to drag you into this, she said, her voice cracking. You've done so much for us already. I don't want to be a burden. Jack reached out, placing his hand gently on hers. You're not a burden, he said, his voice low and sincere. You've made my life better just by being here. You and Eli have given me a reason to care about something again. I'm not going anywhere. For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of his words settling between them. Naomi didn't speak, but Jack could feel the relief in her shoulders, the way she seemed to breathe a little easier. She wasn't alone anymore. She didn't have to face everything on her own. Jack was right there with her, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was running. The next few days were filled with quiet conversations and small, meaningful moments. Jack and Naomi began to talk more seriously about their future, about the possibility of staying in this town, building a life here away from the chaos of their pasts. It wasn't going to be easy, they both knew that, but they also knew that they had a chance, a real chance. One afternoon, as they were sitting together on the porch, Naomi turned to Jack with a thoughtful expression on her face. I've been thinking, she began slowly, about what you said about starting over. I think I want to stay. I think I want Eli to have a chance at a normal life, a life where he doesn't have to hide or be afraid. Jack smiled, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. That's a big decision, he said, but I'm with you no matter what you choose. Naomi nodded, her gaze turning toward the horizon. I know it won't be easy, and I know I can't just forget everything that happened, but I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to give Eli the life he deserves. I want him to grow up knowing that he's safe. And that he has a future. Jack's heart swelled with emotion as he watched her. He knew how much this meant to her. He knew how much she had sacrificed to get to this point. And in that moment, he realized just how much he had come to care for her and for Eli. He had never imagined that his life would change like this, but now, with them, it felt like the beginning of something new, something beautiful. We'll make it work, Jack said, his voice filled with determination. We'll make sure you and Eli have the future you've always wanted. Naomi smiled, and this time it was a smile full of hope. It wasn't just the smile of someone who had survived. It was the smile of someone who was ready to start living, ready to build a life that was truly hers. And Jack knew in that moment that whatever challenges they faced ahead, they would face them together. They would build their future, one step at a time, side by side. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt like he had found something worth fighting for. And for Naomi, it was the first step towards leaving her past behind, towards finally finding the peace she had longed for. As the weeks turned into months, Jack, Naomi, and Eli found themselves settling into a life they hadn't expected but were learning to embrace. Jack's house, once a place of solitude, was now a home. The once quiet corners were now filled with laughter, with the sound of Eli's footsteps echoing through the hallways. Naomi, though still haunted by the memories of her past, found peace in the rhythms of everyday life. They had created something together, something new, and though it wasn't perfect, it was theirs. The town had become more than just a place to hide, it was a place to rebuild. Jack's garage continued to be the heart of his daily routine, but now, after work, there was always something to look forward to, coming home to Naomi and Eli, sharing meals and making plans for the future. But there were still challenges. Naomi had never fully shared the details of what she was running from, but Jack understood that it wasn't something she was ready to talk about, not yet. However, the fear that had once lived in her eyes, the constant worry of being found, had started to fade. She still checked the windows occasionally, her eyes scanning the street, but it wasn't out of desperation anymore. It was more of a habit, a reflex she couldn't quite shake off. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Naomi seemed quieter than usual. She had been looking out of the window again, her face distant. Jack could feel the change in the air, the familiar tension that always crept in when she was lost in thought. "Something on your mind?" Jack asked, his voice gentle. Naomi looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. She had grown so much since they first met, her strength evident in the way she carried herself. But Jack could still see the remnants of the woman who had been forced to flee, the woman who had endured so much. "I've been thinking about the future," she said, her voice soft. "About what happens next, about Eli. I want him to have a life, Jack, a life that's safe, a life where he can grow up without fear." Jack nodded, understanding her completely. He had come to care for Eli like his own son. He couldn't imagine a future without them, but he also knew that Naomi wasn't just talking about what she wanted for Eli. She was talking about herself, about the life she had always dreamed of. "You're giving him that now," Jack said, his voice firm. "You've already started. You're building a life for him here with me. We're in this together." Naomi smiled, though there was still a hint of doubt in her eyes. "I know," she said quietly. "But there's still so much to think about, so much that I'm not sure about. I've been running for so long, Jack, I don't know how to stop, how to let go." Jack reached across the table, gently placing his hand over hers. "You don't have to do it alone," he said softly. "You've got me, you've got Eli, we'll figure it out together." For a long moment they sat there, their hands intertwined, the warmth of the moment hanging between them. Jack could feel Naomi's uncertainty, but he could also feel her determination. She was ready to build a future, ready to give her son a chance at something better. She just needed to take that final step, and Jack was there, ready to take it with her. Over the next few days, they began to make more concrete plans. Naomi started to look for work, something she had never done before in this town. Jack helped her with her resume, and they spent evenings discussing what kind of job she might want. She had always been a skilled craftswoman, working with textiles and creating beautiful handmade items. Jack suggested she try selling her work at the local market. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a way for her to feel independent, to contribute to the life they were building together. Naomi was hesitant at first, unsure if her creations would be accepted. But Jack encouraged her, reminding her that she had nothing to lose. Slowly, Naomi began to feel more confident in herself. She began to find joy in the simple act of creating, in the thought of turning her passion into something that could provide for her son. As the days passed, Naomi began to flourish in ways Jack hadn't expected. She found herself laughing more, spending time with Eli in the yard, teaching him about plants and nature, showing him the beauty in the small things that so many people overlooked. Jack watched them from the doorway sometimes, marveling at the way Naomi had blossomed into someone he admired deeply. One afternoon, Naomi came to Jack with a suggestion. She had been thinking about it for a while, and she was ready to take the next step. "Jack," she said, her voice filled with a quiet determination, "I want to make this work for us, for Eli. I think I want to start a small business, selling my crafts, maybe even opening a shop one day." Jack's heart swelled with pride. "That sounds amazing, Naomi," he said. "You've got the talent, you've got the drive, I'll help you however I can." With Jack's encouragement, Naomi began to work harder on her craft. She started attending the local market, selling handmade blankets, scarves, and woven baskets. Slowly but surely, she began to make a name for herself. People from the town came to admire her work, and Naomi felt a sense of accomplishment she had never known before. It was more than just a business. It was a part of her, a piece of her heart woven into every piece she created. In the months that followed, Naomi's business began to grow. She gained loyal customers who returned for more of her work, and Jack supported her every step of the way. They worked together to find ways to expand her reach, advertising locally, participating in small-town events, and slowly turning her passion into something more tangible. One evening, after a long day at the market, Naomi came home with a huge smile on her face. "Jack, guess what?" she said, her eyes sparkling. "I sold every single one of my pieces today, every single one." Jack couldn't help but grin, his heart swelling with pride. "That's amazing, Naomi, you did it." Naomi laughed, feeling the joy of the moment. "It's not just me, it's us. We did this together. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Jack smiled, his heart full. He knew that this was only the beginning for them. There would be challenges ahead, of course. Life wasn't perfect, and their pasts would always be a part of them. But they were building something real, something lasting. They were no longer running, they were living. As the seasons changed and the world around them grew warmer, Nayeli, Jack, and Eli continued to create a life full of love and hope. They had found their place, their home, in a town that had once seemed so far away from everything they had known. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving together. For the first time in a long time, Nayeli looked toward the future with hope instead of fear. She had found a place where she belonged, a place where her son could grow up free from the shadows of their past. And with Jack by her side, she knew that anything was possible.